settled. My name is Holly Morehouse. I'm the Executive Director of Vermont After School. Many of you we have seen weekly or multiple times a week since the middle of March as we've moved through this whole COVID situation.
And I'm sorry, I just got into the and it's out. So
as a field. So thank you for joining us once again this week. The purpose of this call is to talk about the new initiative announced last week by Governor Scott and Secretary Smith to create school-age care, child care hubs to help with the care and learning of school-age children, particularly kindergarten through 6th grade when schools are doing learning remotely. A couple of Zoom things just to cover. If you are willing to, it'd be great if you can make sure that your name is reflected. Sometimes it doesn't work if you're calling in, but if you're on a computer or device, to have your name actually show up, that helps us as we take questions. If we can't answer the question today, we know who to follow up with and who asked the question, and we can track it that way. If you are able to change yours, if you hover your mouse over your box that has your image, in the upper right-hand corner, there is a blue box with 3 white dots, and if you click on that, it should give you the option to rename. You do not have to, but it makes it a lot easier for us to track who's on and who asked what questions and how to get back to you. In addition, please try to keep your microphones muted. We do have a rather large group on today. We will be using the chat function. So if you scroll down or hover your mouse around the bottom of the screen, you should see something that says chat, and if you click on that, it should open the chat box off to the right. And at any time, if a thought, an idea, a question occurs to you, please use the chat. We do have several people on the call from Vermont After School who are monitoring the chat, and we will try to organize the questions and get you the information you need. Last note is if anything weird happens with technology or whatever, and we have to end the meeting immediately, we will, and we will follow up on email on how to get you the information you need. Also, like if all the members of Vermont After School could do a wave, just so you know who's on here, and just know that we are really glad to see you. So, this is a big announcement. This is a big day. We are really thrilled, as I said, that Governor Scott and the state recognized this need. All of you and many of you who have been working in this field for a while have known that this need has been out there, and that what happens with children and youth outside the school day and over the summer is immensely important to their health and well-being and learning and success in life. So first of all, thank you for what you do, and thank you for chiming in to this conversation to think about innovative and creative ways maybe we can expand these services. I want to also remind you of something that we've talked about. As I said, we've had these calls all throughout the COVID period since mid-March, and we've had some themes that have carried through in our field that has really helped us as a field and as individual programs and organizations working with children and youth to deal with all the uncertainty and this craving for answers that we have right now that we can't always have because the landscape is changing hourly, it seems at times. One of our key principles has been to please, please, please stay in the conversation with us. So when you hear something, if it doesn't sound right or if that's not going to work, like don't just walk away from the conversation in frustration. Stay in the conversation. I think those of us who have been in this conversation around, the essential child care, summer programs, the health guidelines, I think together we have learned that it is by staying in that conversation, and maybe the first time it doesn't look quite right, but then we learn a little bit more, and as we move through it, we get better and stronger at it. And we can work with the state and with the regs and what we need to work with to try to make it better. So please stay in the conversation around this hub program as well. The second principle that we continue to put forward is do what we do with children and youth and try to keep them in that problem solving mode. We will not have all the answers today, I will say that, and there will be things that as we move through this program, as people are setting up hubs, we're going to uncover a lot of problems and challenges, so we need to be in that mindset and approach it in that way. So how do we get to the answer? Because what we're trying to figure out today is really important to children, youth, and families in Vermont. And the third one is, you know, don't be afraid to make some noise on behalf of the field. Those of you that work with children and youth in this out of school time space, and those of you that are thinking about opening up hubs to work in this space and you haven't yet, you're the ones that know what's going on, and we need to hear from you, and the state needs to hear from you, and we need to have that sort of unity as a field. So don't be afraid to speak up and ask. Some of you already have in the questions you submitted. You didn't ask specific questions only about the hub program, but you're like, what is this going to do to the field if? You know, and you started to think about those broader questions. So please continue to do that and raise those up. The flow for today's call is we're going to start with providing some information that we know so far that hopefully will answer some of your questions. We have downloaded all the questions that you submitted in the registration form, and we've got those organized by theme. So Miranda Gray, Miranda, if you could wave so everybody can see you. So Miranda Gray is the school aged care project manager for this project. I will let her share a little bit about her background and how she ended up on this project when I pass over to her. So Miranda really is our point person at the Department for Children and Families and with the Child Development Division. So she will be our point person there, and she's going to go through some of the parameters of the program, what we know so far about the grant program. And then I will talk a bit about the process of how we're trying to identify the hubs and what it looks like to walk through that process. And then Nicole Miller from our team will start to lift up some of the questions. And Miranda and I will work our way through the different questions. So once again, at any time, if you have a new question or a follow-up question, please use the chat because we will also be monitoring that and be lifting up questions that way as well. So I think with that as an intro, I will now introduce Miranda and let her talk a bit about her role and then some of the parameters of the grant program.
Thanks, Holly. Hi, everyone. I'm Miranda Gray. As of last week, I was the Reach Up Administrator, so working with the TANF program. And so that is working with families that are lower income, obtain job skills, make connections for their children to really help lift people out of poverty. I worked with Commissioner Brown for about the last 10 years, and so he asked me if I would be able to come over and assist with this project, which I've been more than happy to do. I have such great partners in Vermont After School and Let's Grow Kids who are really helping me get up to speed on the childcare world that you guys live in every day, which I was only peripherally attached to before. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm learning a lot. And we'll talk a little bit now about what we do now with the grant agreements. So I think like the real key to these hub agreements is we are looking for sites that will be operating when schools are on the remote days. So I think that is like one of the very first cuts to this is that programs would have to be operating when schools did not have children in their facility. The money that we have specific money to help elevate and lift up these hub grants. And those, I'll just briefly go over to it, but knowing we'll probably have more in-depth questions, but we're looking to be able to support, and for the first month only, staffing costs, supplies that might be needed, furnitures and fixtures, supplies could include computers. So one of the things that we're looking for these hub sites to be able to do is to provide support for the children that might still need to, for instance, engage in an English class at 10 o'clock. So that will be something that the hub sites are helping coordinate, is kids getting into their programming, and as well as other enrichment programs throughout the day when they don't have classes. We're also going to be able to support things with like rent and utilities, insurance such as liability insurance, and then also potentially, depending on the need of the area, sign-on bonuses. We know that staffing, we're looking for staff in a short period of time, but also being very mindful, I should put out there, you know, of where that staffing comes from is something that we're trying to really look at. So I think another really important piece here to know is that the hubs, once we identify them, which Holly will talk more about that process in a moment, is that we really can only cover the first month of cost. This is what we have gotten these dollars for. So we'll be asking sites to give us a budget, and then we would be doing a true up. So if you overestimated cost in a certain area, we, the state, would be looking to get money returned. I think another really key factor, something that we've been already receiving questions on, is that there can be a cost to parents. It could be that maybe that the hub and the school or maybe an employer work out something, but it is anticipated that there would be a cost to parents. The money that we have does not cover what would be, you know, a copay per se. We are looking to make the hub sites be able to get the CCFAP money, so that having to be eligible, so there are certain health and safety measures that would be included in the grants that go out to the hubs. But that doesn't mean necessarily that you need to be licensed. So, and I'm learning more about this. I'm sure there will be very specific questions that people have around that. And I'm happy to have those questions raised so I can get answers and just help get more clarity. But did just want to put that out there that programs don't necessarily have to be licensed, but there will be certain grant specifications that you do have to fall in line with. Yeah, I think that kind of gives the broad overview, and not without going more into detail of the process that we have started to identify potential sites. I will stop there and then have Holly pick up that piece.
Great, thanks, Miranda. So once again, big picture, this grant program is to identify and set up sites specifically for the remote learning days. It can be an existing program where you are now going to operate on those days. It could also be an existing program moving to a new site, or expanding or offering something at a new site or a new school, a new community. It could be also a new partner who hasn't traditionally been in this field, a business or a community organization, a senior center, something like that, that wants to step in and help out. What we are right now in the process of doing is understanding the landscape of what's needed across the state, and who's interested in being in this space, right? So that we have two surveys. There is a primary survey, and we're going to put the link if you haven't already filled it out. So the way to get into the conversation to start is to fill out the survey form that basically says, what are you thinking about? You know, what part of the state are you in? I mean, this is like how basic we are right now. Like, where are you located? What, you know, schools would the children be coming from? Who do you think you can serve? How big could you, you know, serve? What would the schedule look like? It'll ask questions about, you know, what does your school schedule look like? So that an A-B kind of day, and you're going to be operating on Wednesdays, or are you going to have the A kids when the B kids are in school, or like, what are you planning on? So that gives us, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be, just give us an idea what you're thinking about. So we're really trying to map that landscape. At the same time, we're trying to use that survey and the information you give us to map the landscape. We're also, you know, working and following what the school plans are doing and changing, you know, and mapping that at the same time. Because there are parts of the state where the schools are in session for children. So we're talking about children kindergarten through 6th grade. And the schools are there 5 days a week, so there aren't any remote learning days. You know, and maybe you're already an after-school program there. So that might be an area of the state that actually isn't going to need a hub that we're talking about, right? But there's going to be other areas where schools are remote or hybrid or fully remote, and we're going to need, you know, more hubs targeted down in that area. So right now we're trying to figure that out. So the way to get into the conversation is to fill out the survey and let us know. Then what we're doing at Vermont After School is we're processing all of those. And some of you I see on this call, I know we've already reached back out to you. So the next stage is that we're building profiles for each of you about what your hub could look like. What kind of hub are you looking at? You know, where is it? How many sites is it? How many kids would it serve? And so we'll be reaching out to clarify information, fill in missing data. Some of you I know also that when you filled it out, you were thinking one thing, and then as you had those conversations with us, you're like, oh wait, actually I could do this maybe, you know, so that's okay. You can change your project through this process as you learn more about it, and as we have those conversations. So that's okay. So the next stage would be that reaching out. If you're not, if you don't hear from us right away, don't worry. It just means what we're trying to do is look, you know, some of our first cuts are to look at high capacity. I see one of the questions there, is there like a minimum number of kids or something like that? There isn't really, but we are trying to build capacity quickly. So if you were trying to do that, right? So we're working from the point of view is like, well, who can get up and running quickly, and who thinks they can serve a large number of kids and sort of take care of a community or a couple of communities or a section or region or something like that. So that's who we're kind of reaching out to first, so we can identify those quickly. And then we'll keep working our way through the list. We will also be in touch to let you know if it looks like what you've written in makes you not eligible. So I know, and this is nobody's fault, I know we like put the survey out before we even had like all the details. So I know some people who have filled out the survey are really just looking at after school kind of care, and the way that this grant program was set up with the federal dollars is really for that remote learning care. So if you're not doing any remote learning days, you're not going to be eligible. So we will get back to you and say, it doesn't look like you're going to be eligible this way. But if since you filled that out, now that you know that, if there's a switch in your plans, once again, write back and let us know. Well, now I think I could actually do this on Wednesdays or whatever the remote learning days are. So there will be some of that back and forth right now as we build, if you think about it, building the landscape. Some of the things that we are taking into consideration as we move through this, and sort of if you think of like sort of in layers, it is that geography of where the need is. So places where schools are remote or hybrid, the capacity of your program. Sometimes some of you are looking at a specific population, like some are setting up hubs to serve the children of the teachers who are going to be teaching in the school day. That's fine. Some of you are setting up more for the community. Some are looking at, you know, healthcare employees at a particular location. It's going to be their children. That's okay. Just let us know. We'll try to build that portrait. Some of you are in areas, you know, Burlington, Rutland, maybe where there's multiple partners in the space. Part of what we'll be doing is reaching out to sort of see how you fit together as a hub. I know in the original, if you heard some of the announcements about the estimate was 100 kids per hub. That doesn't necessarily mean that every site is going to have 100 kids. It may be that you have 3 different locations and you've got 30 kids in a location. It may be that you have a smaller site, but there's a few others in your community. So together you kind of make a hub. So it's going to be a very Vermont solution to a very Vermont-y kind of problem, right? We don't have a top-down school reopening plan. We're not going to have a top-down hub plan. It's going to be very customized to communities based on what's happening there. So once we get through sort of that phase, we will move forward, ones that look promising. And then I think the next conversations you'll be having are, you know, is with licensing. You know, if you're not using a school space or a space that has been used for childcare before, you know, are the safety measures in place, water and sewer, fire safety, and all that kind of work that we need to do to make sure that this is a safe place. So And that would, we're not gonna take over licensing. We have licensing experts at CD and at the state, so they will be working with you around that. So it's going to be a busy couple of weeks. There is not on some of the other grants, there were like particular dates by when you had to start in order to be eligible. We don't have a date deadline on this one for a start date, but we do need to, as you all know, we need to respond quickly because parents and staff and all that kind of pieces need to get in place. So, so we are trying to do it as quickly as we can. I do want to say something about staffing as well. We know that staffing is a huge challenge. As you're filling out the information, it does ask what your challenges are, but for right now, if you're interested in being a hub, let's move forward with the idea that we're going to be able to find staff. Right now, as we build the landscape, let's say if there were staff there, if you can get the space issues figured out. So by filling out the form, you're not guaranteeing anything, and by filling out the form, we're not guaranteeing that you're going to be selected as a hub. But it is a way to help us figure out what you're thinking about. We will talk, I think we're going to move to some questions, but I will talk more about staffing, because we also have, once we get through the landscape building piece, we also have money and time and attention to put towards the staffing issue. And we also have money and time and attention to put through staff training, to help you get staff up to speed and provide training once we get them identified and you get them hired and so forth. So Nicole, how are we looking on questions?
There are a lot of great questions, both in the chat box as well as what came in on the registration form before. So I think where would be a good space to start would be, are the hubs open and available to all children? Are there certain demographics that we're looking for, certain priorities? Do certain groups get priorities? Wondered if Holly or Miranda, if one of you could help answer that question.
You take that question and let me know if my volume I saw afterwards, I apologize that I wasn't loud enough before. There isn't any priorities, and that this would be open to all children, recognizing that some children and some families will be eligible for CCFAP dollars and others will not. So there could be a cost for parents, but these hub sites, the intention is that they are open for everyone.
I see some of the questions in the chat that are kind of related about if you're eligible. So Beth Ann, your question, yes, if you are considering expanding your hours to offer remote learning support, to offer childcare when the schools are remote, right? So it's a remote learning day and the kids need a safe place to be, and you are going to open up a program to provide that safe place, that qualifies. That's the kind of care that we're talking about. Also, for those of you that already have plans in the works, that doesn't mean you're not eligible for this. If you're up, hopefully that's the best case scenario, right? You're already planning and figuring out how to do this. And maybe this infusion of these grant dollars could help make that even easier. The way the grant dollars are set up with this focus on the first month is this understanding that there's the startup cost, there's some risk, right? Because we don't know, are these places going to be open, this expanded hours, is it for 1 month? Is it for 4 months, right? So what the state is trying to do is to be clever about using the federal dollars to take on some of that risk. They'll pay the entire month's worth of programming using this grant so that you aren't taking the risk for something that someone else pointed out. Well, what if schools go back October 15th and you've popped up your site and you've done this? Well, your first month would be covered under that scenario. I will say, I think, and Miranda, you can catch me on this. I mean, these federal dollars have to be spent by the end of December 31st. I do not expect that the state is going to want to start up a hub, in December. So if that's your first month of operation, that is a case where it might be too late. I said earlier, there might not be a last day to start up, but we really are looking for things to start up in September, October, I would say. Does that fit with what you're thinking, Miranda?
Yeah, thanks, Holly. That is what we were thinking. I think that would be a little bit late, and probably we would have missed meeting the parents' need at that point.
So there's some other questions in here about, and we've already alluded to this a little bit, but can we just reiterate some of the key points around licensing, whether sites have to be licensed, whether programs that aren't licensed, if parents could still use CCFAP funds?
Yeah, thanks. So programs don't need to be licensed. However, the grant agreements that we will enter in, the state will enter into with the hub sites will have certain specifications that you have to meet. So there will be very specific specifications, I don't want to say regulations, specifications about health and safety. There are certain trainings that we need partners to be able to take, which is where Vermont After School will be helping to supply those trainings, as well as we have some trainings supported by the state that we can share. So I think that is you'll have to agree to those specifications, but by having those in there, we are able to bring CCFAP into the hub programs.
I wanted to pick up, there was a question too about, do we have to wait for all the hubs to be ready before they get funded? And the answer is no. We are trying to think of it in phases. So like we'll have a first group that, you know, probably have been, maybe they're already planning and they're ready to go, and the need is there and it's clear, and we will put those forward to CDD, DCF, and that might go in a first phase, and then we're working with the next phase to come through. So it's not that it's a race so much. It's we want to do what's safe and best for children, but we do recognize that some areas are going to be ready sooner than others. So we don't want you to have to wait for someone who's going to take a little bit longer to get going.
Great. So we know what we've heard from many of our conversations with you is that staffing is a huge issue. And I think like Holly said, you know, we are moving forward with the hope that we'll be able to, you know, when you're talking about your capacity, that we'll be able to move ahead with those numbers. But Holly, are we able to talk a little bit about what specifications staff might need to have? You know, do they need to have certain qualifications? Things like that would be helpful.
Yeah, sure. So you will be hiring your staff. So you will be in charge of, you know, who you want and how you want to hire. We do, as we do with licensed sites or school run sites, they are going to have to, you know, be safe with children. They are going to have some level of training, and part of what we're setting up, you know, in September is to have that training available so they can have training both around the mandated reporter training and things that are required of everybody, as well as, you know, some child development or social emotional learning, resilience trainings, so that you have staff that are able to operate in that space. As far as finding staffing, we will be pushing out a big initiative to help draw people to the space. We're just framing out what that could look like. Full page ads in the newspaper, a joint school spring account for all of us that we can all use, you know, things on Spotify, like whatever. We're just starting to map out what the possibilities around that. If you have ideas, please put them in the chat or email us, because we will be building that up over the next couple of days. Really is a way to generate excitement and buzz around the state about serving children and youth and working in programs, and then directing them to your sites to try to help fill that need. But we will definitely have to, you know, do screening and staff qualifications and make sure they meet, you know, the standards of what is safe and appropriate working with children. The question about, you know, we don't know how long the remote learning days are going to go on. So it is true. You might be hiring staff and it's a month and things are going smooth and your school goes back. Or, or it goes the other way, they're in person and then cases start to spike and they start to reduce the number of kids that are there and they go more remote. We don't know. I mean, so that is part of the conversations with staff and part of the challenge. So, ways that we can find to encourage and entice people to work in the field without, we're being really, really sensitive to, we don't want to, attract a bunch of people to the hubs that we're just pulling away from existing programs, because all we've done there is just shifted the capacity from one location to another, and we haven't solved any kind of problem. So we're really trying to find solutions around the staffing that really strengthens the field as a whole. And I guess this is more from the Vermont after school side, is that also our hope is that this is a huge investment in our state in this field, and whatever we can do to build a system right now with this opportunity that strengthens the after school, summer, youth serving organizations going forward, that would be the ultimate win-win, right? So whatever structures we put in place, so maybe your program 2 months from now isn't needed on remote learning days, but you've got the space and the staffing and the structures and the parent fees figured out, and you can morph into an after school program, especially in those places where now many places that are going 5 days a week are getting out at 1 or 1:30. So there's still half a day of childcare needed for working families. So maybe you can morph from being a hub to being in that space. So just some considerations that we are happy to puzzle through and talk through.
Holly, there was a question a bit ago about, are there any expectations to for the hubs around remote learning? So obviously students are supposed to be learning during these days, but it's happening remotely. So do sites need to have licensed teachers? Is there an expectation around helping with that type of learning? Maybe that might be a question for Miranda too.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that one. So there isn't an expectation that you would have licensed teachers teaching. The expectation would be that you would have Wi-Fi. So if that is how the children are supposed to be engaging remotely, that they can do that. And I had saw in the chat, I think some schools are providing children with tablets or Chromebooks. So if that was the case, then the hub site wouldn't need to have those available. I think what we're finding in conversations is there's going to need to be a lot of collaboration between the school systems and the hub sites when we're originally looking to what makes sense, where should we pair, in what areas, so that we'll know that we don't want a hub site to invest a lot of money in getting Chromebooks, then to find out that the students all have those made available through school because perhaps you need those funds to be used somewhere else. And I just lost it. There was a question about when would you get to know about if you were going to get a grant. I think that's part of the process that Holly was talking about. Is right now we're mapping those out and identifying, and then once we've identified, like, yes, this is a good fit or good fits for this area, then you would be working with myself as well as others here in the Child Development Division to make sure that we have everything in place that you need. So we would be working really closely and hopefully expediting those grants within, a matter of days if possible.
I want to pick up on the question about the agencies and the cross agency. This is a field that does exist cross agencies, and we always have. This effort, the project, sits firmly with DCF, Department for Children and Families, the Child Development Division, and that's where Miranda is out of. However, there is a multi-site team that is in daily communication. We're on it. Our partners at Let's Grow Kids are on it, and licensing's on it. We're also working with to get Agency of Education representation there and Department of Health, so that we can work sort of cross state agency to have these conversations and make sure that you as providers and potential hubs are not pulled in different directions, but that we're we're sort of having those conversations too. So please hold us to that. I will also say that as far as the guidelines, yes, you have to follow the health guidelines in all of these hubs, the health and safety guidelines, and it will continue to be the Department of Health that leads on that and who we will always look to for the health and safety guidelines. And we can definitely, as we have throughout all of this, reach out to Brina Holmes or others from her department and have another call about that for those who would like to have those conversations, because that is so important, right? What we are not doing is about putting 100 kids in a single room right now with COVID. So all of those guidelines will have to be applied. You could serve 100 kids, but you've got to follow the pods and the cohorts and the masks and the social distancing and all those conversations.
Is there an estimate on the number of grants that are going to be available? I know, Miranda, during the governor's announcement, they listed out, how many they thought that might be available in each county and a total number. Can you talk a little bit about how that has morphed in the past week since that announcement?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. So we did initially say we thought there would be about 73 sites, hub sites. But I think what we are learning is, as Vermont After School has reached out to different communities, we are finding certain areas where maybe there isn't a need for a hub because kids are in school 5 days a week. I think that there's also, potentially some areas of the state where some smaller hubs are going to be needed to meet the need. So, we can have these really large hubs, but as Holly just said, that are safely distanced and kind of meet all of the guidelines that are in place right now around COVID. But we could also have much smaller hub sites as well to make sure that we're still meeting the need of those communities. And that's really what we're doing with the mapping. So 73 was our estimate based upon how many kids we knew potentially could need care. But that is something that is flexible.
And as far as the average award size, I don't know if we have an average, but what the award size is based on is that first month of cost. So looking at what it's going to cost to run your hub, you can front load some of those costs. So if you're buying the personal protective equipment, the PPE equipment, or furniture, or insurance, or computers, whatever you need to buy, you can buy in that first month and have that in your first month's budget. And when we reach out and we're doing the follow-ups, one of the things we're asking you, so please be thinking about it, is what's your estimate? What is your budget estimate? It's not a guarantee that that's what your actual grant's gonna be for the number, but that's the number that we're gonna put forward to CDD for you associated with your proposal. So it's that, and so it can have some heavier costs that may not be for the next few months, but you do have to spend it, that money in that month period, because there will be a reconciliation at the end of the month where you verify that that's actually what you spent, that you spent all the federal grant dollars that you got according to your budget. But that's how that works. And then the idea is that for the following months, by then you have it set up that parent fees or other funding sources are covering the cost, the ongoing running of the program. So once again, this funding is really to get over that startup piece, but not to do the sustained running necessarily. You can cover staff costs in that first month. So even if you have parent fees coming in or other dollars coming in, you can use the grant dollars in that first month to cover them, and then work with your money flow to balance out some of that costs over time. Is that, Miranda, you want to add on anything to that about sort of the cost and the timing and how to do their budget?
I think you covered that really well. I think that is something, to be thinking about, and to, I don't want people to spend a lot of time potentially not everyone that we that fills out a survey, as Holly said, will end up being a hub site, but it is something that if you are identified to be a hub site and we start engaging those conversations, I will be looking for that up front. So I think, or within a couple of days of us saying like, this would be great, we think you would be a great hub site. So I think having that kind of sense, trying to think about what things will cost would be really helpful, because it will just expedite that process more.
There's a bit of a question that's followed up with that, Miranda. There's a question about, will grant money reimburse for expenses that have already been paid or paid in advance before items are purchased, or a mixture?
Sorry, I'm just processing that question.
Yeah.
I think I might need some more examples. So, Anne, if you wouldn't mind, putting, if you have specific thoughts about that, that would be really helpful for us to think about as we engage in those conversations.
I think too, my understanding is that you would get the grant. So unlike the summer, some of the other pieces where you paid out of pocket and then were like reimbursed, this one, my understanding is that you would get the grant and run through your expenses and use that money to spend things in that first month. And then at the end of the month would be the reconciliation. So if you haven't spent all the grant dollars, then you might have to send some of it back. But it's meant so you don't have to outlay the expense yourself. So it's not a reimbursement grant in that sense. Does that fit, Miranda, with what you understand?
Yes, thank you. Yes, so that is the thought of the grants, that we will be providing the money up front. So that way that the hub site program don't have those initial costs.
I also wouldn't expect it to be, we can get clarification on this. I don't expect it to be retroactive, right? So I wouldn't purchase things now and then expect the grant when it starts 2 weeks from now or whatever to cover what you're purchasing now. So I would just be careful of those timelines, and we can get further clarification for folks on that.
Holly, can you just reiterate the process again about how folks apply? And Sam, if you would share the link again in the chat box.
Okay, so I want to be really clear. This does not look like a grant competition in the same way that many of us in the field are used to seeing in a way, right? Where you get the RFP and you download the grant application and it fills out that way. This is a different effort. This is a COVID pandemic effort to stand something up because there is a crisis in our state. So the way to get into the conversation and let us know that you are interested is to fill out that survey form, the link there, and give us as much information as you can. If you fill that out, it doesn't guarantee you a spot, but it does let us know that you are in the conversation and you are thinking about something. The next thing that happens is that as we're working through these, we will reach out to follow up to get clarifying. So for each potential hub piece that's moving forward, we're trying to create a profile that says to DCF, this is what they're thinking about. Here's who they're going to serve. This is the size of their budget. Here are their challenges. Here are the issues. As we get those complete, we move them forward. So that's the second stage. Some of you have already been contacted, and some of you haven't heard from us yet, but we are working our way through that list. At that same time, if what you submitted looks like it's not going to be eligible, we'll flag that for you. So the easiest one is the remote learning days. If you didn't put anything in on a schedule about remote learning days, we're going to flag it for you and let you know and say, as of right now, what you have set up doesn't look like it's gonna work. All of that is really to build that landscape and sort of get through the first cut. And then I think the next stage really is, how feasible is it? What's happening with safety and space and health guidelines and working with licensing. This isn't a grant competition in the sense that you're not competing against each other, really. It's more in the sense like, who can do it, and the time we have, and to meet the needs and to solve the staffing and the space and all those problems, so I would say it's more like you just keep moving forward, and then to the point where either you open up and you're running, or to the point where you're like, oh, I've hit at something, you know, that's not going to work. My space isn't going to work, or I can't hire people or something like that. And on a lot of those barriers, we are trying to position to help you, like finding, you know, how can we drive staff? How can licensing help you figure out spacing? But some of you will run into a situation where there just isn't a space. And that might be the point where you're like, okay, I'm dropping out at this point. And some of you might be like, there isn't a space here, but now I've just thought of this space. So your kind of profile will change maybe midstream, right? So go back again to what I said about, we're in this problem solving mode, right? We have, $6.9 million for this part of it, the hub part of it. We have huge need, especially in some parts of the community, and we have all of you as players, you know, so how can we move forward and meet this need, and who can do it, and how do we need to morph and change to make it happen? So fill out the survey, be ready for us to follow up with a call, be thinking about what your first month budget, what your request is, be thinking about how many kids can you serve, be thinking about which schools they're coming from, be thinking about what your challenges might be, what spaces you might need to use. You can flag and say, we're thinking about this space or that space, you know, and then we can give a conversation about, well, it's going to work here, it's not going to work there. That's okay. So when you fill this out, it's not like a grant thing where you have to have all the answers and know exactly the space right now, right? We just need to know that you're in this. So fill it out. There'll be a follow-up clarifying answers. We understand that some plans may change over the next few days or week as we build this out. Also, you know, as you are aware of others partners, unless someone in this group can serve all the school-aged kids in your community, they're going to need care. There may be other partners in your community. Talk to them. You know, let's maybe there's like a way you know, they're covering part of the demand and you're covering part of the demand, and having those coordinated efforts is just going to make it stronger. You know, it's not going to, you know, you're not necessarily going to knock each other out in a way, but the state is going to move forward in the final selection. It will be up to the state, and it will be where they can build capacity the quickest and the most directly to meet the needs in the community. So that's sort of where the final decision making will happen. So this is in the process of raising it all up. Yeah. Are you, Nicole, looking at the hub and the cohort question, the mixing of kids?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, right, this is a huge issue, right? So if you have A days and B days that are keeping the kids separate in the spaces, and then you're running on a Wednesday, let's say, and now you have kids from A cohort and B cohort in your program, that seems to violate what the other piece is. And that's where we need the Department of Health and Brina to help, you know, us problem solve, like how you do that. And maybe that you have enough kids that you create 2 pods within your program. So you have, you know, your A pod and your B pod, and they're in 2 different rooms with different staff. So they're both in the program in the same day, but there's a way to keep them from mixing. Maybe there's other ways to minimize that contact and that mixing. So we are very aware of it. And I think that the best thing is to work with the health department and be proactive on how we're setting up the plans. The kids, I've heard some of you say this, like the children need to be somewhere. And they're going to be mixing around the neighborhood or mixing in street pods or mixing in this program, or, you know, so, you know, being in the game and helping to have eyes on those, how they're mixing and what parameters and policies are in place, you know, is a benefit. So, and working closely with schools, you know, that's some of the conversation we'll have when we reach out. You know, are you connected to the school? Do you know which kids? And many of you do, you know, but how do we do that as well? It is, Tara, it is about contract tracing. it is about contact tracing. So what we're trying to avoid is a child that's on an A day, right? And the child gets sick, they're on an A day, so then they have to contact trace everybody that was on the A day, but then if they come to your program and they mix with the kids that were also on the B day. So it's minimizing that contact for the contact tracing.
Great. Holly, is there, there's a question that came in through the registrations around how can we share what we're learning during this time and finding at a state level?
Yeah, amen to that. I didn't see that one come in, but I think I did see some come in too that was like, how can we share the information? We will put out information on where the pods are. We are also even if you don't end up being a pod, if you are offering after school on an in-school day and those hours, if we can make sure that's posted too, if you're trying to recruit kids or something, and families and so forth. But we will let folks know where these pods are. We will be, like I said, reaching out to all of you about the staffing, because if we generate interest in people moving into the field and working in programs, we gotta be able to tell them where you are. So, because it's not gonna be us hiring them, it's gonna be you hiring people. And then as far as the learning, I guess, wouldn't it be great if we had like someone following us around and documenting all this learning? Maybe. If they got too close, it would look pretty messy. But I do think that there is, and I'm thinking of, Mandy's project and some of the others that sort of did like a capture. They took a moment in time and captured their summer program at the end and captured the learning and the growth. And I think that that's a really, really great point to be thinking about. How do we capture that learning and growth? And then, like I said before, how we build a stronger system out the other side of it, whenever the other side, we don't even know when the other side is in time, but when we get there, how can we be stronger than we are? There was a quick one, I'll take an easy one, which was the age groups. It's kindergarten through 6th grade is the age groups that it is set up for. And we do recognize that 7th and 8th graders could use some care and attention, and we recognize that this does not solve everything, but for this particular grant, it is kindergarten through 6th grade.
And I think there's a quick question in here about getting reimbursed for our own staff. That if you already had staff that were running a before or after school program and now want to use them full time, absolutely, that's a great way to make sure that your hub or potential hub is staffed so that you have the capacity already in place. Trying to just make sure that we're answering all the questions.
I think this last question that Joanne has about sharing information as it becomes available. So we will put everything out through our e-newsletter. I'm sure DCF and CDD, they have their own newsletter or e-news blast that comes out. We will be, like I said, sharing and posting the hub locations as they become available. I think anybody who fills out the survey, you'll be on that list. So we can, keep you in the loop that way. And you can always use the info@vermontafterschool.org, that email address, to send questions or check in or so forth. Miranda, is there any other pieces that you think we should have in place for sharing outward information?
Yeah, thanks, Holly. I was trying to think if there was anywhere else, but I think that you've mentioned everywhere so far. I do think this is, the governor's initiative, and so there will be a lot of information about this. There are a lot of questions, and Holly and I, and Let's Grow Kids are, being asked to share what we know with a lot of parties. So I do anticipate that we'll get this information out, but yeah, if people have thoughts on, a helpful way, certainly share that as well.
I think Cassie already has like a blog post with the links for the surveys and so forth on the Vermont After School website. So we can use that as a base. And we will try to, I will make now and try to have sort of maybe a weekly sort of thing that goes out to anybody who's served, filled out the survey that just sort of says, we're still working on it. Here's where we are. If you haven't gotten called yet, you probably will next week, that kind of piece. And posting answers to the rest of the questions. Yes, usually what we do is compile the questions and try to get answers, and then we send out materials to everybody who participated on the call. We are also going to work on some like frequently asked questions kind of page that will get posted on the website as things build up. The timeline, real quick, one more. Yeah, thanks, Nicole. One more. It is like, fill out the survey. As soon as you get off this call, if you haven't filled out the survey, fill out the survey and let us know you're in the game. We've been since Monday, we've been processing through those and starting to reach out to people to build the profiles. So the sooner we know that you're interested, the better understanding we have of the landscape. So that is the task right now. And then expect over the next week, week and a half, for someone from our team to follow up and ask you some more questions and sort of take your survey and fill in the blanks with you and really find out a little bit more about what you're doing. Those of you that we've already filled out as things, so you won't all move at the same pace. So it's not like I can give you a set timeline that's like everybody by next Friday will be here. Everybody will move at a different speed depending on how complicated your situation is, your space issues, what else is happening in your community. So once again, it's not looking like a grant competition where there's a deadline and then you're notified by a certain date and so forth, but we're trying to do it as fast as we can. So it's going to be, the next 2-3 weeks are going to be really busy on this. And that's why we're all on it full time right now. So fill out the survey and expect somebody in the next week or so. If you haven't already had someone reach out, which we've already done a bunch, but there'll be more on there, I know, to start doing the profiles. And then we will also, like I said, try to let you know if there's something that looks ineligible, we'll try to let you know that as soon as possible. So that if it looks like you're headed down a direction that's not going to be fruitful for this, we can let you know. You can still go down that direction, you just might not be eligible for these funds. So we will try to do that. It is 2 o'clock on the dot. So thank you all for this hour. Miranda, do you want to say anything in closing?
Yeah, I would like to thank you as well for taking the time to join the call, for Holly for inviting me to join your call that you've been having all along. I really appreciate all the outreach. I've spoken to a number of people as well, and it is it's really helping me understand the landscape that I have jumped into. And just please keep sharing your thoughts, your questions, because it really is, there's so much that's evolving so quickly. It's really helpful to hear from you all. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon and a safe week. And we are going to do another follow-up call next Wednesday at the same time because hopefully we'll have even more information by then. So save Wednesday at 1 o'clock. We'll continue. And if you have any other questions, use that email or throw things in the chat before you sign off, and we will compile those together. So thank you very much.